Welcome everybody. We have here the beautiful, talented, amazing Elsabet Yonas. Welcome, Elsabet.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you for having me.
So in this series of interviews with amazing women who were part of our video creation, I Am All Women, we have invited 4 of those women to come in and just talk to us a little bit about who they are, about their magic, about what they're doing in the world. And I'm really excited to have Elsa join us because I think she's such an inspirational human being. I met Elsa at Artists for Artists and then went on to invite her to be part of an R&D process, which was such a gift to have her in the studio. So welcome, Elsa.
Thank you, Ella. What a beautiful little introduction. Thank you.
So let's start with just hearing a bit about your journey, about how you got into hip hop. You know, what do you do for those who don't know you already?
Sure. So, a little bit about me. I do generally just say that I'm a movement artist because I find it hard to categorize what it is that I do and what styles I use. But I have quite a heavy background in hip hop and choreography and street dance styles. So I tend to just bring them in to everything that I do. I teach quite a lot. I create for stage and for film. I've really discovered my love for film and dance on film in the last couple of years. So yeah, I teach, I share my work. A lot of what I do is driven by my desire to want to have some sort of impact socially, politically. The aim is always to create some sort of movement, conversation. And that's kind of what's behind whether it's my teaching or my creating work. That tends to be the common drive. So yeah, I kind of got into just dance in general through choreography, to be honest with you. It was choreography classes that I was going to. I fell in love instantly. And that kind of led to a number of years of under different crews, shout out Emotions and Definitives, learning a lot of choreography week in and week out. And it was definitely the crew kind of competition and showcase scene that has gotten me where I am today.
Awesome. And in terms of kind of your movement style today, as you mentioned, I really relate to that as well, of not wanting to be defined. Maybe that's one of our missions as human beings is letting go of all of these boxes and all of these definitions. But it'll be really interesting to hear like what hip hop is for you. You know, if it was the first dance that you got into, yeah, what does it mean to you as a style, movement, as a
right, as a style of movement? I would say the choreography that I was learning and the way in which I was introduced to movement was less so in a freestyle format, and it was more so in learning techniques through choreography. So I wasn't being taught foundations as such, hip hop foundations or street dance, foundations as I am now, for example, with popping. But I was picking up a lot of those techniques indirectly through learning choreography, that, you know, these teachers were inspired by hip hop themselves. So my introduction to it as a style was never from a foundation point of view. And I think that made it hard for me to identify it as a hip hop dancer for a long time, because even though the culture that I was heavily sort of invested in and the music and the people were very hip hop, I don't know that I would have been able to enter, for example, a hip hop battle and that my style would have been considered hip hop. And I think that still rings true for today. Even though I've now trained in those foundations, I think there's such a mix of styles in my movement vocab, and that wasn't intentional. That's just the way that things have turned out. But I think depending on context, different people would would look at my style and question whether there's contemporary in there, question whether I've ever trained foundations, question whether I've trained in popping. There's a real just like pool of influences that have built up over the years. So yeah, it wasn't through hip hop foundations. That was something that I really had to relearn. Well, not relearn, just I had to unlearn a lot of what I'd been taught, unfortunately, and not because it was wrong, but because when it came to hip hop foundations, those teachings weren't clear on what they were, what the techniques were, what the names might have been, just useful information, so that I could have a solid foundation in it as a style before being able to build on it. So it was almost like I had to rewind a little bit and learn those foundations, learn those roots, so that even now I can understand how my movement is an evolution of those steps, whereas before I just wouldn't have known where it came from. So yeah, it's been quite a journey in doing that, but it's been really worth it for me.
Thank you, Elsa. So let's talk about your movement, because you know, I personally, I think you're an incredible mover, and I really see that connection to many different styles. And in the piece that we are here for, I Am Women, I Am All Women, there's a really beautiful and powerful kind of very visceral way that you move, and also connection to the words. Can you remember the words? The words that you used?
Oh God, me and lyrics. If you've ever been to any of my classes, you will know me and lyrics are not friends. But I do remember that the section that I moved to was very spiritual. She speaks about being almost being all things. So she says, I'm the earth, and in the sky, I am the answers to the questions why. And then she goes on to say, I am the conscious and the subconscious minds intertwined. And I thought especially that line there, I found it super powerful. I remember reading that and that bit just resonating and being like, Ella, I want this bit now. That in relation to my movement, I think it has developed over time. I tend to not be super literal. So that's one thing to maybe mention, is I'm not super literal in my interpretation of things. And it's very much about how the content makes me feel, or how I can maybe encompass the essence of what it is that somebody is saying. And in that case, I felt like it was very much about simplicity and symbolism, which you'll probably see in my choices of movement. It just felt symbolic. It felt like those lines, especially about the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind and the conscious minds intertwining. It really felt like something that couldn't be literal, because it's not tangible, and so it's quite hard to grasp, but yet it resonates on a deeper level. Hence the choice of movement and the wanting to be aligned, and yet be bigger than whatever it is, whatever this thing is, it being bigger than me. So yeah, super powerful lyrics. And in relation to my movement, I just tried to go off of how it makes me feel, as opposed to trying to reiterate the exact words or the exact content that's being put out.
You finally did a great job, and you know, in terms of the piece that I worked with Elsa on, my own work, that was something I really loved about watching you as a dancer. Is, you know, you get the dancers where they're kind of really in the movement and executing, but you don't see the feeling. And with you, I really feel that we also capture the feeling, as well as you're being a technician, as well as you having beautiful technique. The feeling really comes across, even through the camera. Like if we look at the first film that I saw that you had made, which was Dance to
Was that Female Energy?
Female Energy.
Yeah.
Will Smith, beautiful. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that's something really powerful about the way that you work, is this energy, this emotion coming through your movement.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's really kind. I think it's just a reflection of me as a person, and it's not something that's super intentional. In fact, it started to be picked up on externally and fed back to me before it was something that I was aware of. So I was made aware of that over time, and um, and then I started to hone in on it a little bit more and understand that it's not maybe how everybody chooses to create and express themselves, which makes all the sense to me, that we're all so different in those choices. But yeah, it's just the most natural way for me, that no other way makes sense, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that, like, you know, in terms of kind of like how you work and how maybe others work, or like how you've experienced perhaps that separateness in terms of when you're working perhaps on the hip hop scene, or, you know, in other dance, the other dance community. Um, where is there that feeling of separation for you, or what is kind of the places where you would like to find more understanding of your way and others, yourself and others?
That's a really great question. I think there's two things. I think I realized, even though I spent so much time in the crews that I loved completely, and they're family to me still, you know, dancing with these incredible people in emotions and definitives, even though everything was heavily choreography based, um, it felt like there was a purpose behind it, whether that was, you know, connecting to one another in the group, or expressing ourselves through the music. Um, it felt like we had a joint purpose, and so it never felt like it was just steps. I think what I found hard was, once I took a little step away, to discover who I was as a mover, as an individual, I soon realized, doing independent projects, whether that was taking part in somebody else's vision or trying to create my own, that there was a gap in how I thought I wanted to create, or how I did want to create, and how I was experiencing other people creating. And I soon realized that maybe things like the commercial world weren't suited for me. And even though I'd had, you know, so much training and being able to pick up choreography like that, execute choreography, understand the musicality, it's like I felt this skill set was actually not valuable to my career. And this was an initial thought. It's not how I still feel now, but what still rings true is that there is a disconnect there for me if I'm just learning steps to just perform the steps. I don't feel that I am being of service. I don't feel like that is my purpose as a mover. And so, you know, it's not just me. I think it resonates for those that need those types of movers. They won't think of me, and I won't think to put myself forward. It's a very mutual experience that I've had so far. And so I think that's one disconnect that I experienced, was in, you know, wanting to be a dancer, or wanting to perform maybe with I don't know, a musician or an artist, and realizing that the people that are needed for those types of spaces, my skill set didn't seem to be, or who I am and what I put out just didn't seem to resonate there. So I learned that very quickly. The other thing I learned was, when I was trying to create my own piece for, you know, properly for the first time, was that people prefer to be told what to do. And I didn't want to create in that way. I didn't want to create in a way that was me knowing the steps, asking you to regurgitate them. And even when I was working with people that I loved, the incredible movers, again, there was a real disconnect there. And I had a really hard time actually in that process, because it dawned on me very quickly that we were speaking two different languages, and that not everybody is willing to be in that process, and not everybody is willing to be a mover in a space where you're asking for 50% of their input, and you're giving, or 100% of their input, and you're also giving 100%. And yeah, they were both two. They sound like really sad experiences. They were hard. They weren't. They were useful, and they helped me understand the kind of creative I wanted to be, and actually that it was harder than I thought it would be. And I think for a while I thought it was that I was the problem, or that there needed to be somebody to blame in that scenario. But actually working with you, Ella, and working with a couple of others like yourself, it was a really affirming time for me to know that there are creatives who create great work in this way, and you just need to have the right people in the space, and you just need to have the team that's going to understand that creative process. And so essentially it was just miscommunication. It was, an assumption on my part that is how that would be an okay process. But now I know that we're all speaking different languages, and we need to get really clear on what language we're taking into the space, and see if we can all be fluent in it. So yeah, those two things have been massive lessons for me.
Beautiful, so inspiring to hear, Elsa. And language feels really important. Like, we've had lots of conversations about language. Actually, the solo that we made on you for Foreign Bodies and Underwater Love Story was kind of inspired by that, by language, by the idea of movement as another language, and by your experiences with language. So it'd be really nice to kind of talk a little bit about that, both in terms of, is English your first language? Kind of your journey with English, like, I think when we listen to you, definitely think English is your first language. You speak with a little bit of a London accent, I think.
Yeah.
What's your relationship to language? We also talked a lot about like the language in terms of music and in terms of the language of hip hop. It'd be really nice to just hear your thoughts on language, and maybe, the two languages that you spoke of kind of like this way of working, this kind of visceral way of finding out and discovering what's in the space, versus kind of like the language when you have the choreo and you set the counts. It'd be really nice to hear a little bit more about that, about your take on language.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely, like in Foreign Bodies, I think that was a really good example of kind of how to portray the way in which movement can be a language, and the way in which it can transcend language barriers as well. I think in terms of hip hop, so English isn't my first language. I was born in Ethiopia and moved to London when I was a kid, and I didn't speak a word of English. So I did learn how to speak English here. What me and my brother found incredibly helpful, which I don't think we realized just how helpful it was at the time, but we lent on hip hop a lot. We used hip hop music a lot, because even though we didn't necessarily understand what we were saying, we would learn the lyrics, and like phonetically, like we would learn the sounds and be able to reel off lyrics in that way, or try to like write them down. Half the time, no idea what was going on. But that was quite literally a gateway into British culture for me. And that evolved into a gateway into Black British culture and into the world of grime. And if you knew me as a teen, I drove my mom crazy because the only thing I listened to was grime, and that was truly the only thing I listened to for a long time. And so I think it was hip hop musically was a connection, was completely almost like its own language. It was, of course, it was in English, but it also, I don't think, registered in that way to me. It felt like learning English, A, B, C, D, F, G, was very different to me listening to a hip hop track and trying to like learn the lyrics. And so it made learning this language make more sense. It also made it more enjoyable. It also meant that I built a relationship with that genre of music. from an early age, and I was somewhat dependent on it from an early age. And so, as I say, as it evolved into my love for grime, it felt like these people were speaking on things that I couldn't necessarily articulate. And so it became hip hop and grime as like somebody was expressing me and my lived experience as a Black person, integrating into British culture and integrating into Black British culture. It felt like somebody was expressing that experience for me. And probably at a time where I didn't really have the words to as well. So musically, hip hop did that, instantly before I even, got into dance or got into learning hip hop as a movement language. Music in itself, had that impact. When it comes to movement language, I think that's a tricky one to answer, but I think the simplest way that I can put it is that in speaking, there are so many limitations and there are just so many barriers when it comes to language. I teach for the British, for the Red Cross. I teach for their young refugees, and most don't speak a word of English, and it's an opportunity to make them feel welcome. I would have loved that when I was a kid, not speaking a word. It's an opportunity for them to feel welcomed and to have a point of reference for you are now a part of the community here. And I see, in the simplest way I can put it, I see how in those sessions, languages that we're speaking don't matter at all. And I see how I can use movement as a language that transcends that, completely. And I've seen that over and over again. And it's been such a blessing to have that affirmed. And so, yeah, that for me is the way in which hip hop has definitely served as like this alternative universal language, even when I was struggling to understand like the specificities of what it was trying to tell me.
So beautiful, thank you. Totally moved by your words. I know another kind of important person in this journey, similar to kind of this hip hop, almost like being a bit of a savior at that time, is the Hot Brown Honey collective and that journey. It'd be really nice to just hear a little bit about how you met the Hot Brown Honey collective and how that has kind of changed your life, because I think it's been really quite groundbreaking for you.
Helpful. Yeah, definitely. You are absolutely correct. Hot Brown Honey is a collective of women of color, mixed artistry from circus skills to MCing to DJing, led by Lisa and Busty. So shout out to them both. I was very fortunate enough to take part in 2018 through an application and an audition process. I was chosen to take part in the creation of Hive City Legacy, which was a show that Hot Brown Honey's director Lisa and Busty, I believe her role is musical director, that they were creating here in London, and their call out was for women of color, 9 women of color. They had tons of applications come through. It was such a privilege to take part in this, and it did, Ella, it changed my life completely. It changed like my perspective and my view on creating, on labeling yourself as a creator, on those boxes and those limitations that we place on ourselves, and not through them speaking about it, just through their being and the way in which they created. I think it shattered a lot of those boxes for me and labels that I had placed on myself. It was a multidisciplinary cast, Hive City Legacy was as well, and it almost mirrored Hot Brown Honey in that way. Women of color, multidisciplinary, literally no limitations, their thing, you know, their motto is activate, pollinate, liberate. And it's political, it, you know, it is hip hop, but it's also so many other things. Um, and so I think the biggest impact that working with these women had was looking at how was actually just looking at what happens when you give women of color those positions within the theatre, within movement, within music, within circus. You know, not only had I never seen that before in a group, but to then be able to work under them and see the kind of thing you create when you place these people in a space was just mind blowing. Till this day, I've never been in a show like that, and I've never seen a show like that. I think that speaks to unfortunately how unfortunately how often we are not programming women of color in these spaces. And so it was a really empowering process for me. As I say, hip hop, you know, is a huge part of culturally what it is that we used. And when we created Hive City Legacy, because it was London stories and it was London based, it was also an opportunity to bring in that Black British culture and have conversations around how that may be different to their experience as women of color based in Australia, you know. And so musically, hip hop was a huge part of that. Movement wise, hip hop was a part of that. And yeah, it was just an exciting and unique representation of women in hip hop in theatre. That was a real dope experience for me.
Yeah, I love that show. I still like can get the music in my head. Like, did you music yourselves as well? Like the whole...
Yeah, everything was co-devised. Everything was co-devised. We did have, you know, a music designer in the space, but in terms of lyrics and content, everything was created from scratch within those weeks. So even that, just the sense of ownership that you can have in that creative process. Again, I spoke earlier about how affirming your R&D was for me. It was the same with Hive City Legacy. It was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like, you can work with people that give, and you can work with people that give generously and share their creativity generously for the purpose of the vision, you know. And so yeah, yeah, 100%. And it sounds obvious, but I had completely, you know, after the experience I'd really doubted myself. I completely doubted myself as a creative leader, and just couldn't understand how it wasn't my fault, you know, and like landed on the fact that it must have been my fault. So having those experiences was priceless for me, actually.
So inspiring, and it's making me wonder about, like, you know, if the future was female, you know, what might it look like? I know that Hot Brown Honey kind of, they talk about that a lot. They say make way for the matriarchy. Like,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit about that, and in relation to, you know, this creation we just made, I Am All Women. What would the future look like if the future was female?
Oh wow, that's a beautiful question. I think it's important that we continue to ask that question, both through work that we put out and conversations. I think the fact that there are so few women in positions of power, still, not just within, you know, the arts, but across, just across industries, just within actually most job sectors. I think the point is that we haven't seen what it would look like, and that is a shame. If we look at the state of a lot of environments and spaces, especially within the arts at the moment, that speak to that, I think there's so many limitations, and there is so much regurgitating of the same narratives and the same work. I don't know how we haven't all just gone on strike. It's so boring to see the same thing, the same narrative being retold over and over again. it's also going to start to get boring if the, you know, one or two women that you do give that space to feel pressured to and responsible to then create work about female empowerment. Whereas they might just want to create work about whatever the hell they want to create work about, and they just so happen to be women. But there is a responsibility that comes from being employed or chosen when you understand that you're a minority within that space. You don't necessarily feel the privilege to create freely. You feel like, oh shoot, this never happens. I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman, and I've been given this, you know, one opportunity that may not come around for another however many years. And maybe I'm at the National, and am I, no offense to the National, that was just an example. But you know, what if you just wanted to create a piece about, you know, an astronaut going to space, or about literally whatever the hell it is that creatively you feel you want to create. I know that a lot of people within that, in that situation, are going to feel pressured to create something around the fact that they are Black and the fact that they are a woman. And as beautiful as that is, that's still the stage that we are at, and that's because there's not enough of us handing out those spaces and handing out those opportunities to more women. I think that creatively the spaces would just be so much more interesting. I think we would tap into creative processes that are more connected, more nurturing, more compassionate, spaces where people are heard more. And this is from the handful of experiences that I've had working with women. I've seen how creatively, whether it's to do with, you know, outreach work, or whether it's to do with creating a piece of theatre, I've seen how women listen to each other. I've seen the ways in which women communicate. I've seen how a lot of the ideas that come from women are so creatively different to what's already been done. And I don't think we realize the extent to which those voices have not been amplified for so many years. So we've just become accustomed to the existing narratives. We don't even realize, you know, these are narratives that are being led and devised predominantly by male voices. And that makes a difference. You know, it makes a massive difference because they are going to create from their lived experience. And they are not females, they are not, you know, or they don't identify as women, and so they're not going to navigate the world, you know, in that way. So yeah, I think we can continue to dream, but I'm positive that it will be a more nurturing, compassionate, diverse, creative space, limitless, absolutely limitless.
So empowering. It's so beautiful to hear you speak and kind of your vision for the world as well. But I'd like to finish with that, of kind of your vision for what next, both for you as an artist and maybe kind of connecting to the industry as well, the kind of what would you love to see for the world, and maybe you have a little offering for people watching this, and what would you like to offer them?
I think it, as much as it's political, and hip hop is political, and creativity can be political, I think what I'd like to offer is the reminder that something like hip hop has also been a connecting thread for so many of us, and that sometimes that is what gets lost along the way. So whether you are part of that community, or whether you're an individual that just connects to hip hop music or loves to watch hip hop movement, whatever it is, whatever pillar it is that you resonate with, or pillars that you resonate with, I think the reminder of this connectedness and how that language can really transcend our differences and can be an opportunity to share and create from the same space. I would also really like to offer a reminder of listening to one another, and an understanding that in order for us to evolve as a community and as a culture, that listening to one another and our different lived experiences is going to be a huge part of informing the way in which we evolve. And that maybe a lot of its evolution has come about unconsciously. And so may we listen and communicate and be more intentional about how we want hip hop as a culture and creativity as a culture to evolve.
Beautiful. So inspiring. Always, Elsa just summarizes things with such heart in her words, such passion in her words. I think it's really beautiful as well, this idea that we don't always have to be political, we don't always have to be kind of, you know, that maybe your service is in being you rather than feeling that you have to always do so much work, that you know, the gift is just in the beauty of your art sometimes, as well as that. I'm a massive fan at the moment of this idea of how can we use art as a hammer to shape the world. But art can also show heart to others. You know, that art can, just by being art, just by having, you know, like you said about the music, just being able to listen to music sometimes is enough to take us out of our kind of mundane or our thinking, our beliefs, or our subconscious mind. So.
Absolutely. And I think we spoke briefly about, you know, that intersection of politics and spirituality, and it almost feels that something like hip hop for me can land right in the middle, you know, right in the middle of both, and we have access to our relationship to it depending on what we need, you know, in each moment or on that day. And something like a cipher, you know, something like that circle and the freedom that we can define for ourselves within that circle that's spiritual. And anybody who's ever felt that energy knows that is spiritual energy right there. That's freedom.
Truth right there. I found out actually that the cipher in Arabic means zero. Mathematically, it kind of total zero. So it's like that idea that it's that point of connection, that point of nothingness and everythingness.
Beautiful. There you go. That's the perfect fact to end it on.
Thank you so much, Elsabet. It's been so beautiful to speak with you today, and I can't wait to see the rest of your journey. You know, keep following Elsabet. She has some amazing things coming up. Her socials are here with us now, so click on the links, find out what she's doing, and I will be watching too. Thanks so much, Elsabet.
Thank you so much for having me. So much love to you, Ella. Thank you.